the news.
Hi, I'm Tessa with Brainrot News with a few bits of news for you to choke on from April 5th. In Washington, the Senate just approved what we're calling the Live, Laugh, Loot budget, $7 trillion in Trump-branded tax cuts paired with a MAGA vision of a government that's somehow both omnipresent at the border and completely absent anywhere else. The plan paves the way for lawmakers in the White House to start slashing social services, gives a massive amount of handouts to our poor, starving billionaire class, ramps up spending for border security, and throws gasoline on the already raging dumpster fire that is our national debt, now ballooning past $36 trillion. That's trillion with a T, as in too bad if you ever wanted to retire. The budget passed along party lines, unless you count the few Republicans who briefly remembered their souls still technically exist. Senator Susan Collins and Josh Hawley, yeah, that guy, the January 6th guy, tried to soften the blow by backing amendments to protect Social Security and Medicaid. Schumer, sensing an opportunity for some good old-fashioned political theater, tossed in an amendment to limit Trump's beloved tariffs. It failed, obviously, but not before exposing the deep ideological rot spreading through the GOP like a flesh-eating bacteria in a hospital without funding. Rand Paul, that silly eternal libertarian gremlin, voted no, not because the budget destroyed the safety net, but because it didn't go far enough. His logic? Why stop at $5 trillion in new debt when you can burn it all down and sell the ashes to Elon Musk? Democrats scrambled to protect what little remains of the social contract. Medicaid, food stamps, Head Start, childcare, elder care, programs that actually help people. The amendments failed because apparently feeding children is now considered a radical leftist agenda, and to top it off, Trump's new tariffs are already gutting the markets like a fish. But sure, let's call this a victory. A big, beautiful, budgetary middle finger to anyone not profiting from human misery. So remember, when you can't afford insulin, but your cousin gets drafted to defend a tariff-induced banana war in Guam, just know it's all part of the plan. 29-year-old Kilmar Abrego Garcia had lived in Maryland for over a decade, legally, with his wife and children. He fled El Salvador in 2011 to escape gang violence, and in 2019, a court ruled that he could not be deported. That didn't stop Trump, and that didn't stop ICE, who yanked him off the street last month and deported him anyway, like the Constitution comes with an asterisk and a footnote that says, unless we feel spicy. Now, Garcia is sitting in El Salvador's infamous terrorism confinement center, basically a prison designed by people who read 1984 and thought, but what if it was worse? The judge who issued the original ruling was understandably furious and ordered the government to go get him back by April 7th, but the Trump DOJ just said, nah, their excuse? The executive branch doesn't have to follow that court order because it would require working with another country, which apparently is now the equivalent to summoning Cthulhu. And here's where it somehow goes off the rails even more. The government's lawyers actually argued that they have no more power to return Garcia than they would to, quote, effectuate the end of the war in Ukraine or return of the hostages from Gaza. Yeah, they seriously compared fixing their own screw-up of illegally deporting a man whose life is now in danger to ending a global armed conflict and rescuing hostages from a military siege. And these people, they run our country. They also tossed in an evidence-free claim that Garcia has ties to MS-13 because no Trump-era scandal is complete without a pinch of racist fear-mongering. So here we are. A man was illegally deported. A judge said fix it, and the government responded, we can't. We're not wizards, even though it was their own goddamn wand that broke everything. In something that can only be described as authoritarian cosplay with a side of book burning, the U.S. Naval Academy has yanked nearly 400 books from its Nimitz library. The purge is part of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's mission to scrub the military clean of anything related to diversity, equity, or inclusion, otherwise known as the radical idea that other people exist. Gone are books about the Holocaust. Gone are accounts of African Americans who served in World War II. Gone is I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, because Maya Angelou apparently poses a threat to national security, or at least to the brittle egos of men terrified of anything they didn't personally write in Crayon. This wasn't just some bored right-wing librarian getting carried away. This was part of an actual government-ordered keyword search. They combed through the shelves with phrases like gender identity, civil rights, and racism, then declared anything that acknowledged these things to be too woke for midshipmen to handle. So the message is clear: train to lead, learn to kill, but for God's sakes, do not read about how America treated black soldiers commanders in the 1940s. Don't read about feminism, don't read about genocide. That's too divisive. Just stick to the classics like war, war, and more war, preferably written by men with crew cuts and rage issues. And they deny that it had anything to do with Hegseth visiting the campus recently. Just pure coincidence. This isn't about education, it's about control. It's about rewriting history into something simpler, whiter, straighter, and more obedient. It's not just censorship, it's ideological cleansing with a bureaucratic smile. And if you're wondering where that ends, it ends with history repeating itself, and no one left who's allowed to read about the last time. A Russian missile obliterated a residential neighborhood in Kryvyi, President Zelensky's hometown, killing 18 people, including 9 children. Another 61 were injured, and the blast ripped apart 20 apartment buildings, dozens of cars, and the last illusion that there's any part of Ukraine untouched by Russian cruelty. The missile landed near a playground, a place where children learn to climb, fall, and laugh, and now it's a crater. Zelensky called it what it was, terrorism, and begged for better air defenses. Meanwhile, the US Embassy offered their signature brand of lukewarm thoughts and prayers without even bothering to name the attacker. Can't offend Moscow too directly, right? Wouldn't want to disturb the delicate feelings of a genocidal regime. And because no tragedy is too great for Russian propaganda to twist into a lie, Moscow claims the strike was aimed at a meeting of Ukrainian commanders and Western personnel. Right, near a playground at 9 in the morning on a Tuesday. Maybe the commanders were all disguised as 5-year-olds playing tag. Just hours later, another Russian drone strike killed a woman and wounded 7 more. It's like Clockwork now. Wake up, dig out the bodies, bury them, repeat. But it's not a war, not in the clean cinematic sense we'd like to imagine. It's an ongoing act of genocide fueled by one man's obsession with empire and the world's cowardice to stop him. It's children in body bags while Western diplomats play footsie with their neutrality. Ukraine isn't asking for miracles, just the tools to stop their skies from raining death. So let's get it straight. If you see someone still calling for peace without naming Russia, they're not anti-war, they're just pro-collateral damage. The only both sides here are alive children and dead ones. In a rare and much-needed display of spine, New York state officials have informed the Trump administration that they will not, in fact, be gutting diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in their public schools, no matter how hard the federal government threatens to pull funding. Because someone in Albany remembered that authoritarian decrees from a guy who thinks bleach cures viruses aren't legally binding, the Trump edict gave every K-12 school in the country 10 days to swear a loyalty oath promising they'd erase any trace of DEI from their curriculum, hiring, staff training, and presumably bathroom graffiti. If schools didn't comply, they'd lose federal money. Wow, I guess caring about kids is when you withhold funding from poor districts unless they agree to stop acknowledging that racism exists. New York's education department, led by Daniel Morton Bentley, fired back with a polite version of eat shit. In their letter, they pointed out that the feds don't actually have the authority to do this without going through proper channels like laws, due process, and basic reality. More importantly, New York said DEI isn't some illegal radical cult, it's actually aligned with federal and state law. You know, the ones that say schools aren't supposed to discriminate or teach kids that white supremacy was just a misunderstood marketing campaign. Of course, this is all part of Trump's broader strategy to turn public schools into little ideological prisons where every book is about Andrew Jackson and the only color in the classroom is beige. He promised to give control of education back to the states, unless, of course, the states don't obey his every command like a dog begging for scraps, because this isn't about education, it's about purging any concept that threatens the MAGA worldview. Equity, gone. Empathy, dead. Black History Month, not unless it ends with, but they were happier under Reagan. New York's resistance matters. It's one of the first real shots fired in the classroom culture war, and other states need to pay attention, because once you let an administration erase inclusion, they won't stop there. In an act that only makes sense if your brain has been replaced by a wood chipper, the Trump administration just slashed protections across more than half of America's national forests, an area the size of Germany, so they can log the ever-loving hell out of them. Now, why would they do that? To prevent wildfires, allegedly. Yeah, apparently the solution to climate-fueled infernos is to remove the trees entirely. Can't burn if there's nothing left to catch fire, right? That's not policy, that's a supervillain monologue. Agriculture's Secretary Brooke Rollins, whose name kind of sounds like a character from Yellowstone who poisons horses, issued an emergency directive giving the U.S. Forest Service free rein to gut environmental reviews and silence public input. The new rules fast-track logging operations and let the timber industry treat national forests like their own personal Home Depot. They even killed off the administrative objection process. That's the part where communities and conservation groups could say, hey, maybe don't clear-cut 1 million acres next to a town full of retirees with asthma. Now they can yell into a void while bulldozers start their engines. This absolutely absolutely is not about wildfire prevention. If it were, we'd be funding controlled burns, managing underbrush, or I don't know, doing literally anything else backed by science. Instead, it's a $7 billion love letter to the timber lobby with a PS that says screw the birds. Environmental groups are already sounding the alarm, calling this what it is: a forest liquidation sale disguised as safety. Meanwhile, logging executives are just foaming at the mouth over the possibility of doubling timber harvests, boosting sawmill jobs, and cashing in on the sudden freedom to chainsaw through public land like it's a piñata stuffed with profit. Look, nobody's saying wildlife prevention isn't serious, but turning half the country's forest into matchsticks isn't a safety measure, it's a climate death spiral in a lumberjack costume. Let's not pretend this ends with forests either. This is what authoritarian extractivism looks like. Strip the land, silence the people, profit, repeat. Measles is back, and not in a fun retro way. The US has racked up 607 measles cases in just 3 months into 2025, more than double what we had in all of 2024. At this rate, smallpox is going to rise from the grave like a DLC boss fight. Leading the viral parade is Texas, because of course it is, with 481 cases packed into one mostly unvaccinated Mennonite community in Gaines County. New Mexico's got 54, Kansas has 24, and Oklahoma and Ohio are doing their best to keep pace, as if this were a TikTok challenge titled "How fast can we unlearn science?" Unfortunately, 2 people are already dead, one of them a child in Texas and another an adult in New Mexico. Those numbers are likely to climb because measles is a brutal little bastard, one of the most contagious viruses known to humanity, and one that we'd virtually wiped off the map before a vocal minority decided that injecting their kids with anything other than vibes and garlic cloves was tyranny. This isn't a medical mystery. This isn't like COVID-19, where people were scrambling to understand a novel virus. This is measles, something we solved decades ago with a safe, simple, highly effective vaccine. It's not even controversial among doctors unless your medical license is printed on a Bible page. And yet, here we are, thanks in large part to America's new religion of misinformation, led by high priests like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who believes your immune system is a divine force field that can only be compromised by socialism. The CDC is begging parents to vaccinate their children, but conspiracy-fueled communities are treating public health advice like it's a satanic ritual. They hear MMR and think it's a mind control chip implanted by the deep state and the ghost of Anthony Fauci. And look, yeah, some of this is due to isolated, close-knit religious communities, but don't let the rest of the country off the hook. Vaccine skepticism is mainstream now. There are people who think antibiotics make you sicker, but raw milk cures leukemia. We had a vaccine. We had herd immunity, and we pissed it away because someone's cousin shared a meme from a Facebook group called Moms Against Science. You wanted freedom from mandates? Congratulations, you're free to die from a virus that should only exist in textbooks and Oregon Trail simulators. This weekend, over 1,200 hands-off protests erupted across all 50 states as Americans rallied against the unholy alliance of Donald Trump and Elon Musk, a combo nobody asked for, but now we're stuck with, like a cursed Wish.com order. These protests were organized by more than 150 groups, civil rights organizations, labor unions, LGBTQ+ advocates, veterans, and probably some librarians with bloodlust, and they all came together for one simple reason: to tell Trump and Musk to keep their goddamn hands off our rights, our jobs, and our dignity. Rallies hit everywhere, from DC to Boston to Columbus, Ohio, and even outside Trump's sacred golf mecca in Florida, where protesters bravely chanted within earshot of a man who once tried to nuke a hurricane. So why are people pissed? Oh, just a casual list of horrors like slashing federal jobs, shutting down social security offices, erasing entire agencies like their browser tabs, rolling back transgender protections, deporting immigrants like it's a competitive sport, and cutting healthcare funding in the middle of a measles outbreak. The administration's defense statement, and oh my gosh, I wish I was joking, was basically, we're protecting Medicare and Social Security by making sure illegal immigrants don't steal it with their crazy mind powers or whatever. I may be paraphrasing a bit, but not as much as you think, because if there's one thing that collapses government entitlement programs, it's definitely not tax cuts for billionaires. It's that undocumented grandmother getting insulin. At one rally, labor union Paul Osadebe summed it up: Trump and Musk are devaluing public workers and torching communities, which is generous, really. I'd say they're gutting the country like a fish and selling the bones to SpaceX for rocket fuel. Now let's talk about Musk for a second, because he's in charge of the Department of Government Efficiency, a title that sounds like something out of a satirical dystopia, but is tragically, unfortunately, real. His plan for efficiency is to replace public services with memes, cryptocurrency, and whatever's left of Twitter after he used it as a toilet. And Trump, he's still playing all the hits, fear-mongering, scapegoating, and sprinting away from facts like he owes them money. And yet, despite the massive turnout, these these protests haven't hit the scale of the 2017 Women's March or the 2020 BLM uprisings. Maybe people are exhausted, maybe they're scared, or maybe, just maybe, they're wondering what the hell it's going to take to stop a guy who's been impeached twice, indicted, and now moonlights as a retirement home exterminator. But one thing is clear, people are done being polite about it. The gloves are off, the signs are sharp, and the message is simple: hands off. Because when the government starts to look like a billionaire frat house and your rights are on the chopping block every fiscal quarter, protests become a survival strategy. Hold on to your survival kits, folks. The Trump administration has just axed the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, the last shred of hope some communities had for surviving the natural disasters we all know are coming, thanks climate change. And if you thought that things couldn't get worse, they totally can. The BRIC program, which was meant to help communities prepare for things like wildfires and floods, you know, those terrifying things that happen almost weekly now, was designed to save lives and infrastructure. It had already pumped $1 billion into the initiative, and over 450 communities were busy elevating roads and installing drought-resistant systems like their futures depended on it, which, well, they do. But now, poof, all gone. All the BRIC applications submitted between 2020 and 2023 canceled. Any unused grant funds? Well, the administration just took them back, like a rich kid snatching away a toy right before you realize it's the only thing that'll save you from drowning in flood water. Why the change of heart, you ask? It's to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse, because clearly, keeping people alive in the face of rising water and infernos is just a little too much of a waste for these guys. And let's not forget, these are the same people who believe global warming is just an annoying inconvenience. And FEMA's future? Who knows? Trump's got plans to dismantle the agency and hand out money to the states directly, which is basically like giving the keys to the chaos machine and saying, hey, good luck with that. Oh, but don't worry. It's all part of the administration's larger goal of targeting anything related to climate change, disaster preparedness, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those just happen to be the things that ensure the world doesn't, collapse around you. Communities who thought the BRIC grants would give them a fighting chance against natural disasters will now have to cross their fingers and pray the next time wildfires rage or floods drown their neighborhoods. Because caring about the future is when you take away the lifeline for surviving the end of the world. As the central United States slips beneath rising floodwaters, nature is serving up another brutal reminder that we live on a climate change time bomb with a defunded weather service standing in as our only smoke detector. Flash floods are sweeping across Kentucky, Missouri, Arkansas, and Texas, submerging homes, turning roads into rivers, and killing at least 9 people, among them a child who was on his way to school and an elderly person in Kentucky who never had a chance. This isn't just weather, it's a warning call, and nobody's answering the damn phone. The National Weather Service, the agency that's supposed to scream "get out now" when disaster strikes, preferably before disaster strikes, is operating on life support now. Nearly half of its 122 forecast offices are short-staffed, with vacancy rates over 20%. In hard-hit areas like Arkansas and parts of the Midwest, those numbers creep past 35%. It's not just a staffing issue, it's a systemic collapse of our frontline defense against extreme weather, and we did it to ourselves. The culprit? A toxic cocktail of climate denial and efficiency worship. The gutting began under Trump 2.0 and was lovingly turbocharged by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, a dystopian PR name for we're going to hollow out every institution until they're too weak to stop us from selling survival back to you. The result? Fewer weather balloon launches, delayed storm damage reports, gaps in emergency alert systems, and meteorologists working punishing shifts trying to do the impossible with a skeleton crew and obsolete tech. All of this is happening as climate change cranks the chaos to 11. These aren't isolated events. The rain is heavier, the storms are stronger, and the disasters are stacking like a tipping Jenga tower. The atmosphere is warmer, wetter, and meaner. Flash floods that used to be once in a generation are now twice this spring and again tomorrow. Tornado seasons are more erratic. The jet stream is out here doing interpretive dance. Climate scientists have been screaming about this for decades, and now it's playing out in real time, while the very people meant to keep us alive are being asked to do more with less or do nothing at all. Every cut to the weather service is a gamble that the next storm won't hit your town. Every vacant forecasting office is an invitation to chaos, and yet here we are, watching the country flood while billionaires hoard their savings, and elected officials hold up a soggy finger to the wind and call it leadership. People died because they didn't know what was coming. Next time it'll be more. Climate change isn't slowing down, and if we keep slashing our ability to see it coming, we're not just waterlogged, we're dead. That's all for Brainrot News. Like and subscribe now, because by next week, this episode might be classified as fake news under the Trump Media Truth Act of 2025.